Greg Kasavin, welcome to the Game Informer Show, sir.
Hey, how's it going?
Really good. It's an honor to have you. I know it's a busy time for you guys. You just launched Pyre, for Christ's sake.
Yes, it's been 24 hours exactly, or no, I guess 25 hours exactly. So yeah, it's been a whirlwind. The time immediately after launching a video game is a precious time that I have not experienced very often, seeing as they take a while to make in the first place.
So from the outside point of view, we see you and the official Supergiant Games account on Twitter saying thanks to a lot of people on Twitter. But what is it like internally? What is it like to launch a game from Supergiant's perspective?
It's it's funny. It's almost a little bit, I think, like there's something sad about it, because like you want to believe that it's this big like hooray, like our game is out, and but the reality is we're like monitoring the situation so closely. It's like this, you've got this very war room kind of feel to it, because particularly since our game is both on PC and PlayStation 4, on PC and console. When it comes to computer games, there's just a lot of variables. People have all kinds of weird computers and setups and everything, and we could test the game for 2 years, and we did. And nevertheless, people are just going to run into weird issues that no matter how much testing you did, you're not going to know for sure. So the only thing we could do is just sort of like brace for impact, hope that a lot of people, enthusiastically pick up the game. But the more people who get it, the more of those kind of weird little issues are going to come up. So we're just really focused on making sure that anyone who does run into any issues that we help them get past those. And even though it's like 1% or even less of however many people are actually like picking up the game, those are the people we care about the most, because those are the people we're like hearing from immediately. And we just really want to make sure everyone can play. So that tends to dominate our first couple of days after launch. That's been true of Bastion and Transistor, our last 2 games. So we kind of know what to expect, but it doesn't make it any less kind of intense when the moment happens.
What can the industry do about this? You hear it so often from big indies. I'd imagine working with Sony, they can help kind of play test, make sure everything's going okay on PS4. But when the PC is just such a wide market, what could the industry possibly do as a whole to help out studios like yours?
Yeah, I think I think we're like really comfortable with it. I don't know that we see it as a problem per se. I think it's just kind of the reality of it. It actually feels really good to. So even though I said it's kind of sad that we don't get like the victory lap or whatever,
yeah,
it feels really good, because we we get to just respond. We get to, like, even though we're a team of 12 people, we're like personally responding to every single customer we hear from, and that feels awesome. Like the part where we can have this really direct relationship with everybody who chooses to buy one of our games. I think like a weird thing actually ends up happening, where for some of these people who like they end up having an even better experience with the game, just in light of having like had a developer reach out to them and help them, if that makes any sense. So it makes it busier for us for sure, but I think it's just kind of the reality of games being available in so many places. And that's like a wonderful aspect of games and computer gaming that's like been always one of the core differences. I love console games as well as PC games, but one of the cool differences with computer games is that they're just so kind of, you could play them in so many places and so on. So yeah, I think for developers, just knowing that there's going to be that phase immediately after a game launch where you might have to really stay focused on monitoring how it's going and seeing what everyone is saying. That's I think just part of the reality of launching a game, and I don't know that we'd have it any other way, because it means we get to be very, very engaged with the whole thing.
Do you just keep like a Twitter search up for Pyre then? And then also just like watching a bunch of Twitch streams? Like, what's the monitoring situation overall for even like outside of tech issues? Like, how do you guys keep track of what everyone's talking about?
Yeah, it's not unlike what you guessed there. We're checking Twitter, we're checking Twitch, and the other big one is like our Steam forums. There's like a fan Discord for Supergiant and so on. So we just have all these like. I walked over Amir, our studio director, and one of my colleagues here. I looked over at his desk yesterday, and he had his like Chrome browser open, and I'd never seen anything like it. It was just the tabs were down to like pixel size or something. It was a row of like 60 tabs open, and I was taken aback by it.
Just a fly's vision.
Yeah, just so we're just looking everywhere where we detect there's any kind of traffic happening around people talking about the game. We want to see what all the feedback is. We want to know how we did. That's why the feedback from game critics and from players, all that stuff. We've been working on this thing for 3 years, so what happens is naturally you get pretty close to it. You know what you've made. You know what you think of it. You don't really know what other people are going to have to say, and you yourself cannot like replicate the experience of like engaging with it for the first time because you've played it so many times before.
So even with your background at GameSpot, you still can't remove yourself enough to be like, I think I have a pretty good read.
No, I mean, I think so yeah, with my background as a game critic, I think I am okay at that. I think I tend not to be super duper surprised about like critical reactions to our games, in part because it's easy for me to say that I don't get surprised. It's because my mind goes all over the place. It's because I can imagine people saying the worst, most terrible things, and I can imagine people saying really nice things and anywhere in between, because people interpret games really differently. It's such a subjective experience, and we can control, the stuff that goes into the game, but we can't like control the way that someone is going to take it all in.
Yeah.
And we know that we make games in a pretty specific way. We know it's just like not going to land in exactly the same way for everybody. So if anything, we're always very pleasant. We were very pleasantly surprised that Pyre was as well received thus far as it has been, because this game is capable of, like, more than our previous games. This game is capable of like providing a very different experience from one player to the next. So we're kind of like, we know how we play it, but we don't know how other people are going to take this thing and what their expectations are and so on. So it's been great to see that the response has been so good on the whole.
Yeah, for sure. Just talking about Supergiant's general output, I remember a while back we had Sean Vanneman from Campo Santo on the podcast, and he was saying like, yeah, making your first game as a new studio is hard, but making the second one is so stressful just because it allows the outside world to make a line between the games and then be like, oh, this is the type of games that this studio is focused on. And that's what I keep thinking about Supergiant, like trying to think about the overall vibe between the 3 games you guys have released. I think the only word I can come up with as unifying theme is just confident. It feels so focused and so confident. How do you do it? How do you create such clean experiences for every release? There's no desperate cash grab on the studio's part. It is just confident beat by beat by beat.
I first of all, I really appreciate that. The reason I smirked is because I happen to know that I don't necessarily personally consider confidence one of our strongest virtues around here. I think along the way, during the winding course of the development of our games, we second guess ourselves a lot, but we do, I certainly don't want to diminish your point, because I really, really appreciate that that's how our games ultimately come across. I think we do try to ultimately remain focused on where we're going with a certain game, even if it makes us a little bit uncomfortable along the way, because we do try to push ourselves out of our creative comfort zone with each game we've made, and see what comes of it. Like when we start our projects, we have not just when we start, at no point in development do we have a design document or anything. We just kind of build our games in this very organic fashion, just piece by piece, just playing it, trying to listen to what feels lacking about it, add that, remove this, until we finally start to get a sense that, okay, this thing is winding down. This is pretty much complete for what it is. And
there's no key words. There's no whiteboard in the studio that has some key phrases on it or anything like that.
Not like we do. We're very we come up with those kind of key phrases when it comes to the tone of the experience. Tone is something that we talk about a lot early on, where first of all we do just kind of exploration. We talk about it in kind of a loosey-goosey fashion of like, what kind of tone are we interested in? And then we start to refine it more sharply once we start actually building stuff around it. Like Darren, our composer, will start to make music, in pursuit of a certain tone, or Jen, our art director, will start to like create kind of mood paintings or something like that,
Huh.
and we'll look at that, we'll kind of stare at it and be like, that's not quite there. And we'll start to like adjust it and refine it, like I said, and at a certain point, we'll come up with something where we're like, all right, that's it, that's where we want to go, like experientially, tonally, not in terms of like the exact game loop or like the exact balancing or something like that. Those other aspects, while crucially important to us, are the kind of are the things that we build along the way, kind of in service of the overall mood that we're trying to achieve with one of our games.
And speaking of
so that's been a through line, I think, for the 3 games we've made thus far, is that kind of process.
I read an interview, or I think I heard an interview with you one time where you said something really fascinating, which was that you go in with every project with the mentality of that you're creating a sequel, that the world's already been established and you're adding on to that. Do you want to just fill in that concept a little bit?
Yeah.
Like, how did you stumble across that framework just for mentally structuring these games? Because I think it works really well.
Thank you. Yeah, that's something, that's like an approach that I personally take, like from a writing and world building standpoint. I think, and yeah, that is something that I've said before. I think that it's like a technique or a mode of thought I use just to make sure, it's a test to make sure that the world of your game feels sufficiently fleshed out. Because I think a fully realized world in a game is one in which you feel like there could be any number of stories. So our games have all been these like standalone projects with rather definitive conclusions, where we make these games not to have some cliffhanger ending or to set up a trilogy or whatever, but almost from an opposite point of view of like, hey, maybe this is going to be the last game we ever make. Let's make sure this feels really solid for what it is. But at the same time, part of doing that means building out a world that does feel fully realized, so that at the end of that experience, you could also imagine other stories being there. So part of that approach of like, write it almost as though it's a sequel, is that it's suggesting that there has to be like a lot of kind of rich backstory there to draw upon, where you could have just as soon made a game based on all the backstory stuff, and that that could have been really cool too.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, and you guys do such a brilliant thing with Pyre of having like the keywords that you can destiny cursor your way over and then hover over and it'll tell you more info, and that just makes it so that in theory nobody's going to be lost, even if it's a huge backstory that's implied or a larger world implied.
Yeah, with the particularly with the big cast of characters in this game, it's a lot of characters with a lot of different names and stuff, and yeah, the idea to have these like keywords, these tooltips essentially throughout the game, while a simple idea on the face of it, was really core to how we approach the written narrative, so that at any given point, we don't have to just have characters giving really awkward exposition. Like if they refer to a place, like if I'm talking to you, I don't say, I'm talking to you from San Francisco, the city in California. It's the Golden Gate Bridge is a famous landmark around here. It's very beautiful today, or whatever. This
right.
And sometimes you play games where that kind of dialogue can feel very forced because they're having to like establish the scene. But with us, it's like when the characters just refer to a place called the Downside, well, everybody in that world knows exactly what the Downside is. And the tooltip is just there kind of for your own reference, because even you as a character in this world would have access to this information. And then I think we play with that technique as well. So for me, it was just really fun as like an interactive writing exercise, because we want to deliver narrative in means that are unique to games. And for us, it was like a playful way of using text and words where it felt more interactive.
Yeah, it's like a clean way to integrate a wiki within your game itself.
Yeah.
It's really smart.
Thanks.
Just talking about the way your studio is structured and the way you guys make games, are there studios that you guys specifically look up to when it comes to, I don't know, game development or just general output? Which ones do you really talk about a lot internally?
Yeah, I mean, that's a long list for me personally of studios like past and present. I think it depends on how you look at it. I think from like a organization standpoint, I don't know, we're kind of our own thing. We're not unique in that there are plenty of studios that are about our size. We're 12 people, and it's just kind of a flat when you're 12 people, you don't have like a big chain of command. It's just like everybody plays a very vital part
Yeah.
in what you do. And if someone's out sick or something, well, that's a pretty big percentage of your team right there.
Yeah.
So everybody's that makes it really fun, and puts a lot of responsibility on everyone also, because everybody plays a big part in the outcome of our games. But as far as like studios that inspire us, I mean, for me, that's going to vary from person to person. But for me personally, there was a studio when I was growing up called Origin Systems that created games called Ultima, which are these classic role-playing games. I think every Western RPG, your Elder Scrolls and your Dragon Age, they owe tremendously to the Ultima series. They're like the prototypical open world RPG.
I appreciate you giving the exposition approach to explaining Ultima and Origin for our audience.
I don't know that people know Ultima that well anymore, honestly. And they made a game series called Wing Commander also. Anyway, Origin's slogan was "We create worlds," and that was like super inspiring to me. They made these amazing games that'll stay with me forever. But I, in more like Blizzard has always been a studio I really, really looked up to. They've made it. So there's like the obvious ones, right?
Yeah,
like the Valve and the Naughty Dog and so on. They just the studios that make just the absolute best games from like a craft standpoint. And then there have been a ton of like smaller independent studios also. Cappy, the guys who make they're working on Below, and they made Sorcery. Clay that makes Oxygen Not Included and stuff like that. These studios that are smaller in size but have belted out these amazing games over time. And we're in Campo Santo these days. It's so many. The really cool thing is like Supergiant's been around a while now. We formed in 2009, but it was amazing. Like in the first couple of years that a lot of these studios, like that, we got a chance to meet so many of the people who we looked up to so much, and now they consider us, their peers or whatever. And so I think inwardly we're still very like giddy to get to know some of these people. Certainly for me, where I come from this background of writing about games, where I admire game developers so much. I don't know how anybody does what they do, despite having worked in games in game development for 10 years now. So,
well, when you talk about like the expertly crafted game studios, as far as their output, what have you learned specifically about how they maintain that quality output, which I think you guys are also in that vein of hasn't been a misstep yet? Is it just a matter of setting the bar high early with the initial release, and then everyone can just look back and say, well, we have to do better than that. Let's keep it up.
That's a really tough question. I think if anything, we've approached it almost oppositely to that, which is weird to say. Like we've tried desperately to avoid like a trajectory where we have to feel like where we feel a burden to make like a better game every time. Because the situation is, like, we haven't grown as a team since Transistor. We don't want to grow. We want to stay small because it's core to how we operate. And we've done like the best we could. We put in our best effort with Bastion, with Transistor, and now with Pyre. So if we put in our best effort, it stands to reason, maybe you'll get better in some ways, but you're not going to get like that much better if you've done your absolute best, in my opinion. That may be sort of cynical. So I think we've endeavored to make games that just feel very different, especially like because we hear from people who are like, Bastion is my all-time favorite game, Transistor is my all-time favorite game. We can't tell that person, well, hey, guess what? We've got a game that's even better than your favorite game that you got like tattooed on your arm. Like, we're not going to make a better game for that person because Bastion or Transistor spoke to that person so deeply, wherever they were in life at that point. Our best chance is to make something where they play it and they go, you know what? That was pretty good too. And hopefully for a new set of people, it'll be like the best game we've ever made. But so we just want to make games that are like on the level with everything we've done, that feel different, that feel fresh and surprising. But it's up to other people to decide, which one is the best and so on. That's just not how we approach it at all. Because
Yeah.
if we're like proud of the games we make, then we're not just going to turn around and say like this one's going to be even better than that piece of junk we made 3 years ago. I don't like that kind of pattern. I think it feels like it gets people into a bad spiral where it's hard enough to make one of these things at all, much less to just try to constantly outdo yourself.
Yeah. Well, if you're trying to match previous quality examples, like how do you think the team grew with this game? What was the biggest learning curve throughout the process of making Pyre?
Yeah, I mean, it was such a new game for us. Man, I think what was really different about this one is that we just kind of like, we've tried to do this with all our games to a certain extent, but especially with this one, we just let everybody like run forward doing the stuff that they cared the most about. With Transistor, it was like a more focused experience, like set during kind of a shorter time period. It all had to fit together in a really kind of discrete way.
Okay.
To be convincing as like a single space and a single story taking place over like a short space of time. Whereas with Pyre, it's this more like sprawling journey and a world that could support any number of different kind of strange things happening in it. So we just kind of let everyone run wild as much as possible, and then create a world and a context in which all of that stuff could still make sense and still feel like part of a greater whole. So I think like everybody, it turned into our biggest game ever, like by a significant margin, and we definitely learned a lot from making it. But what we made is so specific, I think, that like again, the specific knowledge that we gained is like unique to making Pyre. Like if we, depending on what, if anything, we go on to do next, it's hard for me to say how much of that would carry forward just due to the kind of proprietary nature of each of our projects.
Yeah, for sure. And thinking about, I mean, with such a broad game, then what don't we appreciate about the process? What's more difficult? What's tough to convey to the outside world? Like you don't understand how tough it is to get it through cert, to rein in the freedom.
Yeah. Man, I think this stuff is hard, but it's the best job in the world. So I'm like super reluctant to. It's easy to complain about like the parts of it that aren't fun. A lot of it is there's just a lot of work that goes into it, right? Like when it's a small, you try to push yourself, you try to make the best thing you can, and you're trying to like manage that while keeping sort of a marathon pace to it, because it's 3 years. Like if you just work your absolute hardest, you're going to burn out after a couple of weeks, and it's like, guess what? You're nowhere near the finish line. So we have experience around actually finishing these things, but I personally find, it kind of doesn't get any easier from the point of view of like, if you're pushing yourself creatively and you're making the best game you can, then if you find yourself going like, man, this is getting easier, then like maybe you're not doing those other things. So I think a lot of the challenges, even though our team has like so much experience working together, it's been the same team that we've been working together for years. There's still like when things get really busy, communicating effectively gets that much harder because everyone is heads down just trying to do their own stuff, and people's patience can start to wear thin and stuff. It gets more stressful at the end. I think that's all like kind of normal standard stuff. We know how to like intellectually or whatever, we know exactly how to work around that. It's like, well, you need to, pace yourself. You need to give yourself enough time in the schedule and so on. Like we know all those things, and we do them as best we can, but you still try to push yourself, and you still get into situations where that's just kind of the space you're in, and you don't know when inspiration's going to strike or whatever. You don't know when you're doing your best work.
Yeah.
And you just kind of have to push through those low points and try to always like maintain good judgment around what's working well and what's not, and just be super honest about the process, and like confront any issues or challenges you run into, hopefully as soon as possible, and like not if you start feeling bad about something as part of a team, don't let that fester. Just confront it as soon as possible. Those kinds of things, like even if you know those things, it's still hard to do. And I, so and especially at the end of the process, like where we're at right now, you look back on it and you wonder what you could have done. You naturally wonder what you could have done better, but you can't like beat yourself up too much if you feel deep down that you did your best, and I feel that we did. So it's definitely a period of a lot of reflection, especially with all the feedback and stuff pouring in. So it's an interesting time for sure.
Well, hey, speaking of a period of reflection, I understand you're so busy with Pyre, but how often do you think back on the GameSpot days? Do you ever think back on those? Oh, you do quite a bit?
Yeah, pretty often, I would say, yeah.
Do you ever think?
I still remember certainly all the games and stuff. Like a lot of games, like stick with me for a long time.
Just games that you reviewed and whatnot.
Yeah, or games I didn't as well. Yeah, games I played. Yeah, I was at GameSpot for 10 years, so it's a big chunk of my life. It's natural, I think, for me to think about those days, especially since now it's 10 plus. This year was 10 years since I left. So now I get to be like more nostalgic about it or whatever, because GameSpot was really hard work too. I think you yourself can certainly, working in the gaming press I felt very good preparation for game development, because there's just never a downtime. That part is actually better, working on a game, because, in between projects, at least you can hopefully take a little breather, whereas at GameSpot it was just relentless.
They never stopped coming together.
You were saying?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, like, do you ever look back on this? Is there something you wish you did more of while you're at GameSpot? Something you wish you knew? Something you wish you emphasized more?
That's a really interesting question. I think I took my work really seriously. There were moments, but I was also responsible. Like I was like a manager of a team, right? And I think like as a human being, like as like a friend to these people I worked with for years, I think there were probably many times when I was too lacking in empathy for them, where I was just like so focused on the work that I like I said, I probably, I think when you look back, it's more important to be a good friend to someone when it's someone you've known for a long time than just like, you're not going to remember, the work you did in February in 2005 or whatever. That's just, the work all becomes a blur over time, but the friendships can last you forever. And I don't know. That's my own beating myself up about it. I'm not sure if that necessarily like reflects the point of view of people I worked with, but there were times when I caught myself and was like, man, I don't know. I think I let the stress of that job probably get to me in a specific way of like, I was just so kind of hell bent on just us trying to do well,
Yeah, it's interesting. But, I mean, that ties into it. I mean, I was going to ask just like what has proven to stand the test of time, but I mean, turns out friendship and love stands the test of time above all games coverage.
Well, in life for sure, right? Because you don't, especially like whether you're in game development or in the gaming press, it's like your relationships are the things. Your relationships with other people around you are the most important. That's the most important thing you got, I think, just no matter where you are. Because if you just, walk all over people, like, yeah, you might get ahead in the short run, but man, people are not going to they're not going to want to work with you again or whatever, or any number of things. It's so important to just be decent to those around you, because you never know who's going to be like, I could give you a specific example. Like, the guy, Amir Ajami, a former colleague of mine from the GameSpot days, he reported to me at GameSpot. I was like his senior editor, but when I went to work at Electronic Arts as my first game development job, I ended up reporting to him. And it's great because Amir Ajami is like, he's a dear friend of mine now, and has been, for many, many years now. Boy, it's a good thing that we had a good relationship, because that might have been real awkward if it were some other way, right? Like you never know how the tables are going to turn. And once you've been around long enough, it's like you see certain people like get ahead and like, man, or I know people who were like interns or something at GameSpot. They're like way past me now. They've done like amazing things. So it's like, man, it's good that I had a good relationship. You know, it's not anyone. They're not people I necessarily keep up with still, but I'm glad that we had a good relationship and stuff.
Well,
so
the interest,
if we do cross paths again.
Yeah, in the interest of being a decent person and crossing paths again, I'd like to apologize for sending you a email when your Final Fantasy 12 review went live. Before I had played the game, I was one of those heads who sent you an email 9.0, little low, Greg, little low.
Oh, wow, you were one of those. I thought 9.0 from GameSpot was low.
I'm sorry.
I always had. That's awesome. Thank you for coming clean. I think it's funny. A lot of people. It's cool that remake just came out because now I think people are more like okay with the idea that game was really polarizing back then. A lot of people actually really hated it.
Yeah, it's fun to see the new crowd like look back on it in the light of Final Fantasy since then and being like, actually, pretty cool. This is more classic Final Fantasy than I remembered. Yeah. Yeah,
it's funny though with the reviews. I mean, even though 9.0 is like an astronomical, I certainly remember with Grand Theft Auto games and Final Fantasy games, it's like anything less than perfection could make people really upset, which was always like it was a sad part of reviewing games because it was never about trying to make anybody feel bad or like dampen people's excitement for something. It's just trying to reflect our own. Just trying to evaluate what the hell we just played.
Sure.
But it definitely has that effect on people. And that's kind of a unfortunate side effect of criticism that it could really influence one's own thinking. And a game you're like incredibly excited about, it could suck the wind out of your sails.
And it doesn't need to. You'll probably still end up loving the game if you're going in that excited and it's a 9 or above or below even. You're probably still really going to love it. So I'm curious, with your time at EA, you worked in the RTS genre for a while with Command & Conquer. Do you still have love for that genre? Do you still feel like there's room in the industry for a big indie push in the RTS genre? Or is it just everything's going to be a MOBA, end of the day, that's it?
No, hell yeah. I think RTS is like, oh man, it's like ripe for the taking. In fact, if you look at, like, it's actually like, it blows my mind that it's so underexplored in a way. It's like, I mean, especially having worked on Command & Conquer to me is one of those franchises where it's like, dude, Command & Conquer, man, this is like evergreen. You just have to do this right and people will go for it. In my opinion, I love Command & Conquer. I will always love it. I love StarCraft. I love Warcraft. I'll always go for those games and stuff like it. But even if you check like Steam today, I think it's like Total War, there's RTS games that are like routinely in the top 10 on Steam. They're just like from slightly smaller studios, but I think people making real-time strategy games are like cleaning up, because there's so few games like that these days. But one of my favorite games of last year is actually a mobile game called Clash Royale,
of course,
which is this like crazy. It's basically a real-time strategy game, like super distilled down. But I thought that game, I had to like quit that game cold turkey because it was so addictive.
Yeah.
But I thought it was like a genius design as like as a distillation of a lot of the really like essential pleasures and interactions of real-time strategy. And a bunch of us at Supergiant played it like for many, many months. So that game I thought was awesome. There's a game called Tooth and Tail coming out in just a couple of weeks that looks really cool. That's also like focused on just kind of taking what is innately exciting about real-time strategy and like stripping away a lot of the bloat that can happen to any game genre just over time. People just kind of add features to stuff and they can like push away newer players once a certain style of game gets too complicated. But
I said that Clash Royale, I'm still waiting for a huge indie or just an indie studio to really nail a good heartfelt RTS. I feel like Grey Goo was kind of getting there a little bit, but I feel like God, there's got to be that market out there.
Tooth and Tail, I think, is the next one going up to bat real soon. Now we'll see how it turns out.
Definitely check it out. So how do you refill the tank after Pyre is shipped? What's the plan?
I don't know. That's one. there's the honest, we do not. One of the nice things about being small is we don't have to plan too far ahead, and we know not to over plan. We put everything into we put everything into one of our new games and everything into the launch and supporting the launch. And then we kind of see what happens from there. People ask us like, yeah, do you know what game you're going to make next? Like, no idea. Like, it's a super taboo. It's taboo even to have like a conversation about it before the dust has settled on the game that we're working on, because it honestly just doesn't. It's a couple of things. One is that every new game we make in some ways is like even if just subconsciously, is like a reaction to the last game we made, even just from the experience of working on it, whether directly or indirectly. And the other part is like, it matters so much what the response is, how we're feeling about it, all those things. But the simpler answer to like, how do we refill the tank? We take a break, right? We have to, once the dust does start to settle on the game launch and everything's running smooth and we're not trying to get a game out the door, we can take some time and reflect and change the scenery, think things through, and come back recharged and start to plan in earnest and figure out where we are, where we want to be, all that kind of stuff. So that's the more I guess official answer. That's the more real answer. But yeah, for the moment, we're just still in that like reacting, a very reactive mode. But
yeah,
that mode where we'll get to take a little breather, that shouldn't be too long from now. I think it's really nice to have the game out there at long last.
Well, yeah. Well, good. Congratulations on the game's launch.
Thank
and
you.
Go get some rest. Have the studio go home for a while. Go on vacation, man.
Yeah, pretty soon now.
Thank you so much for watching this excerpt from the Game Informer Show podcast. You can subscribe to the audio version and listen to new episodes airing every Thursday. We cover big games on the horizon, games that we've just reviewed. We have long-form developer interviews, a lot of fun stuff. So check it out every Thursday.